Well, what a week it has been. As if the coronavirus wasn't enough, now our country is on fire with racial tension and frustration. And this is really nothing new. It just is brought into the light every now and then. Over the past week, I reached out to some of my friends who are pastors and also who are black and asked them, what are you seeing? What can we do? What can the church do? All of these conversations were incredibly insightful and so helpful for me, and we've put them all on PastorRustyGeorge.com if you'd like to watch those. But their overwhelming comments were, the church has been given the ministry of reconciliation. In other words, it's our responsibility to act justly, to love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. And I want to encourage you to be the first to walk across the room. In other words, it's one thing to pray, it's another to reach out to a friend of a different skin tone and ask, how are you doing, really? And just listen. Don't defend, but just listen. I heard about something that took place soon after slavery had been abolished. The ripple effect was still being felt throughout the South, and in a town there was an African-American man who had fallen on hard times and had no food. But he heard of a wealthy white family who may be sympathetic to his plight, and so he found his way to that house. He walked up the front steps on the porch and he knocked on the door. A woman answered the door, and when she saw him, she glanced quickly to the neighbor's house on the right and then the neighbor's house on the left, and then she whispered to the man, why don't you meet me around back at the back porch? Well, then she abruptly closed the door on him. Dutifully, the man went around the house to the backyard, which was much more secluded. The woman came out on the back porch and she handed him a basket of bread. She said to him, now before you eat, we need to thank God for our food. And with that, the white woman said, repeat after me, our Father who art in heaven. After a bit of a pause, the black man respectfully began to pray, your Father who art in heaven. And she stopped him and said, no, just repeat after me, our Father who art in heaven. And again he said, your Father who art in heaven. Exasperated, the woman said, why do you insist on saying your Father? And the man quietly replied, well, ma'am, if he was our Father, that would make us brother and sister. And if we were brother and sister, you wouldn't have made me come around to your back door. Behold how good and blessed it is for brothers and sisters to dwell together in unity. And it seems small for community to be the solution here, but it actually is. Can I encourage us all not to wait, but to act justly and love mercy and walk humbly? To be the first to ask, are you doing okay? How are you doing really? You see, last week we saw how Jesus lived his life, up, in, and out. And last week we talked about what it means to live up in a connection with our Heavenly Father. But he also modeled this value of living in community with others, regardless of what they look like. And so today we're going to drill down on that idea a little bit more about living out. And hasn't the season taught us how much we value being together? My youngest daughter and I went to the DMV the other day. It was like we were headed to Disneyland. We got all dressed up and we're so excited to see some people. And there's something to do and something to see. Our virtual discussion groups right now at our campuses are just off the charts, and people are longing to see each other. And there's a reason for this. We were made to be better together. Personally speaking, a while back in my life, I hit the wall, emotionally, spiritually, depressed, maybe. So I did a deep dive into me to discover what was wrong. It began with getting a counselor, and I met regularly with a therapist who would help me just kind of process my thoughts and give me some direction. Then I wondered if the problem was medical. So I met with a psychiatrist to see if I needed medication. I scheduled an appointment with my doctor for a physical, my chiropractor for an adjustment, even my dentist for a cleaning, you never know. I also worked on my physical health. I joined the gym, I met with a trainer. I downloaded diet apps. I switched to bulletproof coffee. I began to count carbs. I even took a shot of wheatgrass once in a while. And while I lowered my cholesterol and raised my self-awareness, I still felt stuck. It continued with lunch and phone calls with people I considered experts in my field. I met with pastors who had been in ministry longer than me. I quizzed them on tricks of the trade and just advice for longevity. I talked to anybody who would talk to me. I talked to business leaders who seemed to have mastered and sustained success. I listened to podcasts from the wise and watched videos from experts. I read countless books on fear and anxiety and personal development and even meditation. Truthfully, I did whatever I could think of. And while everything brought about a small amount of relief, nothing seemed to last for very long. I noticed even my daily devotions were focused on me. I read what I thought would help me. I picked up devotionals promising to renew joy and facilitate closeness with God. And then one day, I woke up and I had a bit of a King Solomon revelation. Meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. In all of my work to fix myself, I had lost myself. You see, self-discovery leads to personal insight, but it can also lead to social isolation. And maybe that's what you're realizing right now. All this time away from people working on you has made you realize that it's a bit of a dead end. And when you look at the scriptures, it's easy to read it as a list of things to add to our to-do list, and thus feel very overwhelmed with all we have to do. And maybe that's why you've kind of stayed away from it in the past. But the truth is, when you dig a bit below the surface into the original language, you see that the intention was never for life to be a solo act. Take, for instance, Jesus' most famous message, which we often call the Sermon on the Mount, and take a look at some of these commands. You are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. What's interesting about this word you is it's not singular, it's plural. This would be better translated, you all, or where I'm from, all y'all. You all are the light of the world. This little light of mine is not a scriptural idea. This little light of ours, it is ours to share. Jesus says this, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. In other words, all of our self-seeking and self-discovery may be to our detriment. So, how do we do that? How do we lean into each other? We're socially distant, or maybe you're an introvert, or you got more pet peeves than a kennel. Maybe you think everyone drives you crazy, and maybe you're in but your husband's not. Well, I'm glad you asked. The first thing is, I want to encourage you to scan this QR code. This will get you ready for the solution to this problem. And second, I want to take a moment for communion. I'm going to put an image up right now of the Last Supper. You've probably seen this picture before. Jesus is with his 12 disciples. What's interesting, though, is one of these 12 will deny him, one will betray him, and 9 of them will abandon him. Yet he still serves them, because even Jesus himself knew the value of community. Right now, we're going to take some time for communion. I want to give you a chance just to gather some materials that might be helpful for you, whether it's some juice or some crackers. Maybe you're by yourself. Maybe you want to gather some friends together there in your house or your family members. And I want to invite you right now just to take those elements, thinking about what Jesus did for us, but how it began with Jesus modeling for us how to live in this relationship with one another, and even how Jesus knew the need for community.
More abundant and free. shall not fail you. Believe him and all will be well. Then go to a world that is dying, his perfect salvation to tell that he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves. Yeah, he loves us. No, how he loves us. No, how he loves us. No, how he loves. Yeah, he loves us. And oh, how he loves us. And oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves.
Well, I love the topic of community, and I know what you might be thinking is just classic. We're going to talk about community again. And I think that's because community gets thrown around so often to the point that it's really just become a buzzword, to where it makes me ask the question is, do we even know what community means anymore? And so I actually want to turn that question to you all, and if you'll engage with me and humor me in the chat by what is it that you think of when you think of community? For some of us, it might be just the TV show Community. And for others, it might be taking us back to our Monopoly game board childhood and thinking of the community chest cards. Or for some of us, if we get real, maybe you're just thinking about your very own wolf pack. I don't know where you are with it, but the question is important because whatever you think about it, we need to come together for one centralized definition. And that's what I want to provide as we get started today. Something that's simple, something that's clear, and something that's easy to remember. So here's the definition. Community is your connection with one another. Right off the bat, we are shifting the focus off from ourselves onto one another. In fact, this definition, this focus on one another is something that we've seen really come to life within the last week. Right? When injustices strike, when people are wronged, when racism continues to run rampant, our value of community either comes to light or it fades into the background. And the importance of community, the love that we have for one another, the way we show up and express solidarity for one another is a direct correlation to what we believe God says about one another. We value one another the way that God values one another. That all people have inherent value and should be treated as such. And we model the way of Jesus. Everywhere that Jesus went, he elevated all of those around him. Wherever Jesus went, the quality of life increased. And that is community we are called to be, that we were created to be. Rusty said it earlier, we all are the light of the world. And it's one of the reasons we talk about community so much, because quite frankly, it's just a part of who we are. It's in our design. And we truly believe that. We believe it's in our DNA, the way God created each and every single one of us. He wired us that way. Did you know there's 100 one another statements in the New Testament, which is the second half of our Bible? Phrases like this might ring a bell for some of you. Love one another, or serve one another, forgive one another, encourage one another, bear one another's burdens, be kind and compassionate towards one another, spur one another on towards love and good deeds, and even pray for one another. Our lives are meant to be lived with one another. And the cool thing about this is that this design is supported further by our very own experience. Right? If we've learned anything in the midst of this stay-at-home order, it's the necessity of relationships. right? Like the power of connection and the importance of community. I mean, let's get real, even introverts. I mean, extreme introverts are starting to miss people. And for some of you, that is saying a ton. I'm not calling anybody out, it's not you, Rusty, but it's true. And it doesn't need to be explained. We feel it, right? There's just something missing. And it's hard to be our best. It's hard to be complete. It's hard to be our healthiest self without connection, without one another, because we truly believe we are better together. So here we are. We know what community is, right? Community is your connection with one another. We know why it's important, right? We were literally made for it. Without it, there's a gap. There's something missing. But the question begins to shift, and it's the question of, well, how do we build it? Where do we start? So first, I need you all to see that the community that's already existing in your life, whether introverted or extroverted, young or old, or maybe you're a grouch, we all are connected in some form or another. Remember, it's in our DNA. Think about it this way. For the sake of our time together, we can call this our connection pyramid. And when you look at this pyramid, you can find yourself relating to it, because every person that you have ever connected with can be placed into one or more of these 6 categories. And we see at the bottom is our strongest and sturdiest foundation, which is our family. It's our strongest sense of connection, which that makes sense, right? We've been connected with them the longest, gone through the highs and lows of life. We've celebrated birthdays, holidays together. And I understand that maybe that's not for all of us. Not all of us share a great family experience. Many of us may not have a family experience at all. Or maybe you're like me, where my family lives so far away that deep sense of connection, it's not as prevalent, because I might see them once, maybe twice a year. But they're still at my base. But my deeper, more consistent connections are on more of the friend level. And within every community, there are 2 common characteristics. All communities share 2 things, and that is a sense of belonging and a common purpose. So I want you to think through that, and let's run it through the pyramid, right? So we have family. That's easy. Purpose and belonging come inherently in a healthy family dynamic, right? Friends. Your friends are your friends because there's some sense of belonging. But here's the catch. Your friend groups may be different based on that common purpose. I know for me, I have friends that I solely just watch sports with. Or there's friends that my wife and I have that we literally do not hang out outside of every month or every other month. We'll go downtown and find a nice restaurant, just kind of like your foodie friends. Or how many of you can think of the friends that you've connected with solely because you have kids that are the same age? For my wife and I, it's been the dog park, right? I mean, it's one of the most social places that we go because we have something in common with the people around us, and we talk about dog stuff. Same is true with your neighbors, right? You share the same neighborhood with a purpose of having a clean and safe place to live. Even your coworkers, right? You share the same company with the same purpose to either produce a product or increase sales or whatever it may be for your context. And then as we wrap up with acquaintances and strangers, you don't really share much, no sense of belonging or purpose, right? So you see, you can find yourself in that pyramid. We all have some form of community pre-existing in our life because we inherently have connections. It's weaved into the fabric of our being. But now, in order for us to build community, as Rusty mentioned earlier, we cannot just stop at seeing it. We have to move to evaluating it, because we all know that not all community is good community. Right? We can think through, right, gangs are community. They share a sense of belonging and a common purpose. Yet we would say this is not good community. Or maybe coworkers around the water cooler, right? And the conversations are just filled with gossip. It's just toxic, catching up on the lives of everyone else around you other than the ones speaking, right? Not good community. Or maybe you have groups or friends who enable bad habits or encourage poor choices, substance abuse, negligent spending, whatever it may be. Not good community. So what are some of the differences between good and bad community? Is it just positive influences versus negative influences? Is it life-giving versus life-sucking relationships? You know what I'm talking about, right? Some people they just drain you. But let's be honest, this all sounds a little bit too subjective, right? So I want us to take a more foundational approach to this. And I know what you're going to say, but I want us to know what God has to say about it. Yes, I get it. Cliche pastor answer. But do you know why? Because we keep going back to this fact that it's in our DNA. And if we believe that God created this planet and all of us living in it, then why not go directly to the source? And if you don't believe in God, or if you're still asking questions around faith, hey, that's okay too. Because I think despite what you may believe, or despite the questions you may ask, I think we can all find common ground on the fact that these one another statements that we mentioned earlier would be a community that we'd want to be a part of. Right? A community that loves and serves one another, one that bears one another's burdens. Right? In fact, I want to stop there because this is particularly relevant. I mean, what does it look like to bear the burdens of others, especially those who may share a different experience than myself? And it's a tough question, but it's a question that should be asked and one we should be willing to hear the answer. And finally, a community that spurs one another on towards love and good deeds. And the fact is that none of these statements, none of these are mutually exclusive. Yet they should all be present in us all the time. Right? Run these one another statements through your pyramid. Evaluate it. Which of your connections do you see these statements take place? You might be thinking, that's great and all, but my friends who I watch the Dodgers with, or at least used to watch the Dodgers with, I don't need them to bear my burdens. I just need them to bring the chips and the salsa when the game starts. And quite frankly, you have a valid point, because chips and salsa are critical. And you even have a valid point because not all of your community is going to have the same level of depth, level of closeness and connection, right? I have community with guys, before COVID at the gym. I play basketball with them each week. I have community with people that I specifically just watch college football with. My wife and I have community with a few couples who come over for movie nights and game nights, and we have dinner and we try to do life with each other. And then we also have our community group here at the church. And the thing is that each of these connections, they bring a different value to my life. They don't fill me in the same way. That's okay. In fact, that's a good thing, that they don't fill me all in the same way. The important part is being able to see what community you do have, for you to be able to evaluate it, to see what's missing. And then from there, you can begin to build it where you need it, because this is not just a one fix all. We all have to evaluate the different connections in our life. But to build anything requires intentionality and a plan. So let's take another look at this pyramid. Where do you need to be intentional? Where do you need to put a plan in place in order to build community? So starting at the top, right? At the top of the pyramid, everyone besides your family starts at the top of the pyramid. That's just honest, right? And everyone begins to work themselves down. But starting with strangers and acquaintances, simple kindness is the catalyst. Whether that's somebody picking up your trash or opening up the door, that is the catalyst to some kind of a relationship with a stranger that begins to work themselves down. And regardless of what it is, the fact of the matter is that the catalyst is kindness. And that is something that we can all incorporate at all aspects of the pyramid, which is simply to be kind. And it flows down through your coworkers, your neighbors, and your friends. One of the super cool things that I have been able just to continue to see and hear stories is just all of the expressions of kindness in this difficult COVID season. For Easter, my neighbors dropped us off an Easter basket at the front of our door, right? And it was no typical Easter basket that I've ever received. No Easter eggs, no chocolate bunny, no jelly beans. Literally all it was in a basket was just 4 rolls of toilet paper. Super practical, especially at that time. But they just redefined the way you TP a house, right? Just a simple act of kindness. Another cool story is that across all of our campuses a few weeks ago, we were able to partner with people and give away mask and hand sanitizer. 2 products that were in high demand and people needed it. And we were able to partner and give those away to our community, to those in need, for free. It's so cool. And for Canyon Church, we were able to do that outside of where we meet, which is Mitchell Elementary School. And it's in a neighborhood. And we got to see people walking their dogs. There was one guy across the street, he saw us and he was like, man, this is so cool what you guys are doing. He came back before we left. Him and his wife, they left their driveway and they said, hey, we're going to Starbucks. What's your Starbucks order? And they ended up bringing us Starbucks, right? Just simple kindness spurs on simple kindness. So cool. And even for Mother's Day, right? My community group leader, she dropped off something at my front porch and it was a succulent. It wasn't for me, but it was a nice gift, uplifting card for my wife, who is now a brand new dog mom, to our sweet little girl, Sydney Rue. which just makes sense because she's an Australian Shepherd, Sydney being the capital, and Roo, kangaroo. You get it. We're adorable, yes. But just little simple acts of kindness go such a long way. Even last week at Canyon Church, we were able to put together a food drive, and we were able to raise tons of food from your generosity to continue our partnership with our school districts for families in need through our amazing social work. And I highlight all these things to just tell you how simple it can be. And that's why I want you to find a simple way to share kindness, to be a good neighbor, to be a good friend, and love those around you. Because, quite frankly, it goes a long way, and it ultimately builds community. And sometimes we make it more difficult than it needs to be, but the opportunities are truly endless. There are a ton of options. Sometimes it just takes us to be willing and to be creative to figure out what we can do. And the cool thing is that in the midst of all of that, when we choose to do this, we are living in the way that we are created for one another. And so here's how I want to close our time together. It's a key next step for so many of us. I want to invite you to join a group. Now I know, hear me out, this is not something new we've said from stage or on a weekend service. But quite frankly, it's never been easier. See, we're having virtual discussion groups, so it takes place right in the comfort of your own home, in front of your own screen. You don't have to clean the house, you don't have to load the car, and plus, here's the best part, it's only 40 minutes because Zoom will literally end your call so you don't have to be the bad guy. You're welcome. But I get it. The question that typically gets asked is, well, what makes a group at the church, specifically in our case, virtual discussion groups, different than my other forms of community, right? Thinking back to the triangle. Well, the guys I play basketball with, or the people we watch the game with, here's the difference. The first is that a group, it's a place where growth takes place, right? I love the guys I watch sports with, but more times than not, we're just watching the game. We're just hanging out. And maybe the only thing I'm growing in is just good friendship and sports knowledge, which is awesome. But sometimes there's just a level of depth that might be missing. Because in a group at the church, one of my favorite one another statements, and arguably one of the most important, is lived out, and that is, there's something about a community when you're able to drop God in the middle of it. When you begin to have intentional conversations, it becomes more than just playing basketball. It becomes more than just movie nights. It becomes more than just it becomes more of doing life with other people, which is how we were created, connected with one another, where we bear one another's burdens, that we learn from one another, pray together, grow together, do life together. Virtual discussion groups are groups that will meet once a week for 4 weeks, and their conversation is based on the weekend message. So that's like one of the best things about it, is that you're not having to go and listen or read or do anything else. You simply get to attend the weekend service like you're doing right now, and then later you'll meet with a group of people to discuss what you learned and how to implement it, all while meeting and connecting with new people in the process. It's interesting. As I said earlier, all of our connections start as strangers in that pyramid, but they begin to work their way down. And the same is true for a virtual discussion group or any kind of church group for that matter. You all will start off as strangers, and one of two things will happen. You either, one, like them and maybe become acquaintances or even friends, sometimes to the point where they feel a lot like family. And the other option is you may not like them, and that's okay too. And after 4 weeks, it'll be over, and you won't ever have to talk to them again. You don't have to take my word for joining a group ever again. That's okay. I understand. I'll accept that. But really, I mean, when we boil it down, what do you have to lose? Quite frankly, not much. But what do you have to gain? I think it's quite a bit. More relationships, deeper connections, growth, encouragement, accountability. And if you're looking for something more specific than just a group that talks about the weekend service, we have that too. Coming up on June 27th, we have a men's group that's starting, and it's going to be 5 weeks long. And in the midst of everything that's been going on, so many of us are dealing with anxiety. So we have put together an anxiety care group, and that's going to start coming up June 28th and will also last 5 weeks. Whatever it is, whatever community needs to look like for you, I just want you to know that we're made for it. And I want to help you, because here's what we know to be true. We were all created for community. We need one another to be complete, because we are truly better together. Now you've seen your community, you've evaluated your community, and now it's time for us to build community. Let's pray to close our time together. God, we thank you that you are a God who has created us uniquely and beautifully, and that we're all different, but that we can be used together as just one. And God, I pray that we just embrace the inherent DNA that you've given us to be for one another, to do life with one another, and to simply love one another. God, so I pray that for all those who are watching today can be led to a next step of whatever that next step of community needs to look like for them. God, we love you, we thank you, and it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Hey, as we talk about one another and what it looks like to love one another, be there for one another, it all boils down and starts with kindness, right? It's why I wear this hoodie, as a reminder, as I go about my day and interact with whoever I might interact with, that I can remember to be kind. And with that being said, I'm excited for what is coming up next as our worship leaders, Kelly and Aaron, have written a song to help us all remember to be kind. Check it out.
I know that kindness is the answer we're all looking for. I know that love could be the thing that opens any door. Maybe I've been naive before, I'm not anymore. 'Cause I know that kindness is the answer we're all searching for. Really, 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 really need your love. Who really, 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 really need your love. I'm begging you to be kind. I'm begging you to be kind. I'm begging you to be kind. I'm begging you to be kind, be kind, be kind. I know that everyone's got mountains that they're climbing on. Sometimes we throw 'em ropes, but mostly we just throw 'em stones. You know the world never changed for better when hate carries on. So quit throwing love away just to say that you're not wrong. What do you really need to let go? To see that someone really, 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 really needs your love. I'm begging you to be kind, yeah. I'm begging you to be kind, be kind, be kind. I'm begging you